The media and information industries have lost some 60,000 jobs in Australia alone in the last 15 years, with around half those jobs lost during the pandemic. A new research report shows that support is urgently needed to stabilise and protect the public good function of journalism. Now, Dr. Jim Stanford is Director of the Australian Institute Centre for Future Work, and he joins us this morning. Jim, good morning.
Good morning, Belinda.
Tell me, why should we be alarmed, indeed should we be alarmed, that we've lost 60,000 jobs in Australia in the media and information industries in recent years?
Oh, I think we should be alarmed. A democratic and effective and safe society needs information. Information you can count on. And as you well know, when you woke up and scrolled through Facey, you don't know what to believe when you see on that sort of a platform. So we absolutely, despite the technology changes and the cultural changes that we're experiencing, we absolutely have to preserve a journalism and media sector that is reliable, that is accountable, that is informative. And that's why, I'm very concerned about those job losses and what they herald for the future of journalism in Australia.
I guess journalism is in so many ways associated with newspapers, and indeed newspapers have, at this stage of the game, probably taken the biggest hit of our traditional media. Where are the jobs going?
Yeah, well, you're right that newspapers have had the deepest impact. Probably half of all jobs in publishing, including newspapers, have disappeared over that time. And thousands more in the printing industry, where newspapers physically used to get made and still are to some extent. But even newspapers in digital format have lost staff, downsized their newsrooms for various reasons, mostly involving lack of or loss of advertising revenue. But other media sources have also lost. The broadcasting industry has lost thousands of jobs, including journalists. There have been some increases in employment in alternative forms of journalism, like online newsletters and that kind of thing, but they do not remotely make up for the loss of jobs in those other sectors. So the overall footprint of journalism has definitely shrunk.
So what about citizen journalism? Could this step in and fill the breach?
Well, it's true that people, with platforms and social media and so on, anybody can put up something and call it a news article, and there's some great diversity and in a way a bit of democracy with that. But as we've seen with things like the pandemic and all the false information that's been out there about COVID and vaccines and so on, you can't rely on that for your generic source of information. You have to have something that's trustworthy, that's professional, and that's accountable. And if we rely just on whatever we happen to read on Facebook as a way of informing ourselves about the critical events of the day or about our democracy, then we're in deep trouble. This is where we argue that journalism fulfills a public good function, in the sense that a well-functioning society and a well-functioning democracy has to have a strong capacity to deliver information that's accurate and trustworthy.
Okay, so let's talk about that public good journalism. Given that so much of our journalism is supported through the advertising dollar in your newspapers and TV and radio, looking to the future, how do we fund public good journalism? How do we support it? Is it over to the ABC? Is it over to organisations like PBS in the US, or is there another model?
Well, I think it's going to be a number of things. I don't think there's any one sort of magic bullet, Belinda. I do think that public funding for journalism is going to be important, not just through the ABC and SBS and other sort of publicly supported platforms, but also public support for journalism in private outlets delivered through various mechanisms like tax incentives or government advertising, for example. Why doesn't government devote its advertising budget, which is quite significant, to Australian domestic content media platforms instead of patronizing, the Googles and Facebooks of the world? Another part of the problem is that so much of that revenue has been cannibalized by those global digital platforms. Google and Facebook end up pretending that they're news outlets because so many stories that are published in newspapers get reposted on Facebook or the other platforms. And Google and Facebook get the advertising revenue associated with content that they didn't pay for. And that's something that absolutely has to stop. That we've made some progress towards that. We've got this new bargaining code for governing those platforms in Australia. That's a very innovative response, and I think will help. But it's not enough, and we're going to have other ways that protect the content that's produced by domestic media organizations, so that they can fund it on an ongoing basis.
So who gets to sit in judgment of what is and isn't good journalism, quality journalism, or at least what is or isn't accurate?
Yeah, well, I think that is an absolutely doable question. It's not like, something has to get approved by the government in order to be funded. That's not obviously how it works today. That's not how the ABC works today. It's not how private media platforms work either. I mean, you've got newspapers. The newspaper industry in Australia is dominated by four very, very rich people. Yet we still have genuine professional journalism that goes on within the papers that they own. So even where it's a question of allocating public funds, there's lots of experience from Australia and from other countries that you can do that on an arm's length basis. It isn't about government control of information, far from it. It's about supporting the general capacity of our media industry to inform Australians about things that matter. The same way we fund libraries, say, or other cultural institutions. Nobody goes in. The government doesn't go in and say, we paid for this library, we're going to determine which books are in there. Same goes for public journalism.
So is that the way we face we deal with the challenges facing journalism, do you think?
I think it's one of the ways. Our report, Belinda, had 7 different categories of policy measures. One of them is more support for public journalism, like the ABC. One of them is public support for private journalism. Another is addressing that cannibalization that's been happening with Google and Facebook, capturing the advertising revenue that's associated with domestic content. Another would be, I think, the more creative use of tax incentives, where you could reward both consumers and employers who are supporting Australian journalism, reward them with favorable tax treatment. Lots of ideas are out there. I think the first step is just recognizing that a democracy like ours needs a viable, trustworthy, effective media. And if we don't take action to support it, we're going to lose it.
Dr. Jim Stanford, a pleasure to catch up with you this morning. Thank you for your time.